Good morning, everyone. The Accountability and Administrative Review Committee will conduct its first informational hearing. We've been in effect this week is 1 year that this committee was created, and this is our first informational hearing. It is a subject that we think has to be discussed before we go down the path of further reforms that are being discussed in the building, and so we wanted to have the first discussion on this subject that can inform everything else that is going to come after. The subject is performance measurement in state agencies. I am going to do a brief overview. Normally we would have the LAO or someone come before us and give us an overview. We didn't feel that there was a whole lot of history in this subject matter in California, so that would not make a whole lot of sense. So I'm going to do the overview very directly. In California, there have been several attempts to implement performance measurement and management programs. Most attempts have ultimately been canceled or scaled back. The presenters that we have here today are actually some of the success stories or partial success stories as we're moving down this path. There's no official figure, but there's approximately 20 agencies represented in the Little Hoover Commission Working Group on Performance Measurement. It's called the Performance Management Council. This is 20 out of 175 agencies and departments in the state of California. Clearly, it has not spread like wildfire in state government. The timeline, a very brief timeline of performance measurement, starts in 1993 with the federal government's Performance and Results Act that coincided with a California pilot project in total quality management. This was under the Wilson administration. And performance-based budgeting that was being attempted at that time. Of the 5 original departments that had participated, 4 dropped out, and the administration lost interest in the project as the state's financial condition improved. Well, clearly, we're in the same boat in terms of our fiscal issues, but we need to make sure that it isn't something that just peters out. This whole effort concluded near the end of the Wilson administration. In 2001, Governor Davis established a Governor's Office on Innovation to establish a statewide series of web-based goals and performance measures. This was eliminated in 2003 when he was defeated. 2004, Governor Schwarzenegger established the California Performance Review that, among other things, intended to go down that path. The results have been generously described as sporadic and pretty much concluded in 2005. What we have today are initiatives that are pretty much driven by the agency or department that is taking it on. There is no concerted effort at performance measurement. Recent trends are in 2008, the Little Hoover Commission report cited the importance of incorporating performance measurement and quality improvement functions into the basic management structure of organizations as we update legacy IT systems. So they only looked at performance measurement as it relates to IT for those different departments and agencies, not on the day-to-day functioning of those departments and agencies. Practitioners and scholarly literature emphasize the importance of an inclusive process to develop performance measurement programs and the benefits of doing so. What we measure, we prioritize. What we measure, we do. And hopefully what we measure, we do well, because there are repercussions, whether they're public repercussions in terms of not meeting your goals and your stated mandates, or in some cases, if you go to performance-based budgeting, financial impacts. We understand the obstacles to implementing these programs, but we need to know how we can support them. What benefits can we expect from these programs? What can we reasonably expect from other state agencies in the future? In other words, how do we broaden this beyond the 20 to the other 155 agencies and departments? I was in Washington in the mid-'90s, and when the reinventing government movement was happening back there. And I worked at one of the federal agencies that implemented performance measurement. So when I showed up in Sacramento in 2005 and saw that we didn't have any of this in 2005, more than 10 years later, it just astounded me. So I think all of us can agree that in order to have accountability, which is the whole point of this committee, we need to have measurement of what we're doing out there on a day-to-day basis. And a lot of times the hearings that we've had in this committee, we've seen that we don't have accountability because we don't know what the departments and agencies are doing. So that is where I'm coming from on this hearing. I hope that the overview gives you some sense of the real pathetic record that we have in California in this regard. And so with that, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do agree that it is high time that we found out whether or not the plethora of ideas that we have put into place in this state are actually doing what we have intended. Many other states have performance review, performance-based standards and such, and not just for the administration, but for legislation. I really think that it would be wise for the legislature to also undertake, as Texas has done, that when they pass a bill, within it are performance standards that are set in there, outcomes that are identified that need to be achieved, and then those programs are not renewed or not or are suspended if they don't indeed reach those outcomes. When programs or departments do not perform as they are intended to, frankly, I think their budgets need to be cut or their management needs to be changed, because I don't think it's acceptable to enable dysfunction at any level, and obviously the waste of taxpayer dollars that goes along with that. So hopefully the committee today and the agenda we've set out will help us be able to improve performance in our executive branch and hopefully the legislature as well.
Thank you. We only have one panel today, so I'll invite all three of you up together. We have from the Department of Toxic Substances Control, the Special Assistant to the Director, Denzel Verardo. From the Department of Transportation, from Caltrans, we have the Chief of the Office of Strategic Planning and Performance Measurement, that's Debbie Ma. And from Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, the Deputy Chief of Staff, Lee Seal. We'll start with Denzel.
Good morning, members. Thank you for inviting me to what I consider an extremely important hearing. I was a little background. I'm Dr. Denzel Verardo with Department of Toxic Substances Control, but I was part of the performance budget pilot with state parks during the Wilson administration, and then led the implementation team for performance management with the California Performance Review for Governor Schwarzenegger, and currently with Department of Toxic Substances Control. So I have a personal investment in this as well as an organizational one. First of all, why did DTSC in 2007 get involved with performance measures to begin with? So I'd like to give a little background and history and the current results, as well as illustrate briefly our methodology. First of all, 2007 was the time that at that time Director Gorison needed to do a new strategic plan. It had been 5 years, time to pull it off the shelf like everybody does every 5 years or so, and look at putting together a new one. Well, looking at the strategic plan, she realized, not much had been accomplished. A lot of visioning, vision this, vision that, but not much accomplishment. There's a fine line between vision and hallucination. So, you kind of have to get to the real facts now and then. Director Gorison asked if I would look at the program within the department, and my basic question was, what are we measuring on what we must do, which is the day-to-day operation of this department, versus what we want to do, which is the strategic plan. And without knowing what we must do, our accountability, our transparency, what we're chartered by law to do, what we're required to do in the minds of the public, you really don't know what resources you have to put into a strategic plan. So with that, we undertook adopting the California Performance Review's methodology for selecting measures for our core programs. And you believe you have a handout that looks like a mess, but it looks like this. And it shows the dual system that we use to set performance measures. And I'm going to concentrate on the side that says mission. Because, again, the vision side is the strategic plan, what we want to do. But where we focused our efforts to begin with DTSC is on what we must do. So we identified the programs that that were within the organization. And that's not as easy as one would think. You have to really look in the budget. You have to review what are you really supposed to be doing besides what was added on that you really didn't need to do, but is kind of interesting. And then for those programs, both core and support, core being what you're chartered by law to do, support what makes the core programs work, such as administration and personnel. You identify outcomes. What is the ultimate outcome that needs to be achieved for the program? Once you know those outcomes, you take outcome by outcome and say, how do we measure that? And that, by the way, is the hard work of setting performance management measures. Getting the measures right is difficult, and we're still working on that. So after you have measures, you start to collect the data, do analysis, set targets, and then make somebody accountable. And that's what our performance agreements at the bottom do. It's a combination of what we want to do with a strategic plan and what we must do with our performance measures. That's assigned to specific deputy directors and management within the organization to make sure that it gets done. So with that said, in 2007, we trained all of our supervisory and above staff in this methodology and how to set measures. That staff went back within their units and worked with their staff to say, what measures do we think will work? And we took the 300 or 400 measures that came up, refined them, and got down to the number of measures that really we thought would tell us how well the organization is running. Beginning about 2008, we started to use those measures to manage and realized we had to change some of them because some of the measures weren't possible to collect data on. And everybody will go through that, such as mass of toxic material removed. Well, when you start to get in a definition of what mass is, I mean, some is big, some is small, very difficult to measure. Not that we don't want to get there someday, but right now it's not possible. In 2009, Acting Director Movasagi kicked it up a notch, really. He started to review the measures and wanted a dashboard for all the management staff that would be reviewed at staff meetings at least every 2 weeks. And in a weekly reports, people would report on what they are doing with regards to these important critical measures to the department. And I've included that part of that dashboard in the handout as well, so you can see the methodology and what they look at, because the dashboard is just those vital few outcomes and measures that's important to the executive staff. Everybody has their set that they're watching, but the executive staff really only needs to look at ones that work for the organization at the highest level. If something is going wrong, then it's up to the deputy director to wave a red flag, because the metrics will show we're not doing so well or we're doing very well, and we need to adjust resources, which is really the whole purpose of performance measurement, is for accountability. To add another level with this, the ultimate reason we're doing this is for the people of California. So we added a feature called EcoTracker, which is still under development. We have very few measures on there now, but next month we'll be adding more and more that the public cares about. And they can go to our website, click on EcoTracker, and if they're interested in issues of site cleanup or organizational excellence, they can click and look at the metrics that we look at for that. It will be a real-time upload out of our massive data system, so that if there's a specific interest by the public in something deeper, a specific site or something we're doing, they can get into the database themselves and dig deeper and ask questions, obviously. We also set up a panel. Director Malvasagi appointed a review panel because he wanted an outside review that consists of an educator, the dean at the University of Southern California, an environmentalist, the president of the California Sierra Club, a member representing stakeholders, the business interests, an attorney from Southern California, another department director, director of the Department of Conservation, and himself. And quarterly, the department presents one of the core program sets of measures, and they question it. So that we start to refine the measure on what, from the outside, the public really wants to know about on how well Department of Toxic Substances Control is doing. So that, in essence, is the timeline on where we're going. What are the results? Well, so far internally, there's no doubt that our people are managing better. They know where they're doing well. They know where they're doing not so well individually, because everybody really wants to succeed. They also know where the measure isn't refined enough yet. In some cases, we're still counting, number of, well, one of them, for instance, let me give you a real example. We used to count the number of school sites that were cleaned up. That's nice, but so what? It's a count and you put resources in. But besides counting, what are the results of that? How many classrooms were built as a result of your cleanup? How many students were housed because of that? Things the public cares about, I think, more than, okay, there's 300 sites in California that were cleaned up. So the managers are beginning to look at it from that standpoint. What's important to the public? What do we have to do fast? Other results are we're able to adjust resources between, I don't want to say underperforming programs, but ones perhaps that are more successful, and move them into places where we're not quite doing as well. And again, I want to emphasize, we're still in the infancy. Of this. We started in 2007. It's now 2010. By this time next year, we will have a much more sophisticated, accessible system than we do today. One of the lessons learned is it takes time. 3 or 4 years is not unusual to get a system up and running if you're starting from scratch. Almost no State Department would have to start completely from scratch because we're awash in data. Almost every department has tons of data, and you see it every day, but very few have performance measures where you can aggregate the data and see, hey, how well are you really doing? So we're just starting. We have a lot of measures we have to review, refine, so they're more meaningful, but I think we're well on our way, and the organization is a much better managed organization for having done that. Thank you.
I'm Debbie Ma from Caltrans. I'm Chief of the Office of Strategic Planning and Performance Measures, and I thank you for inviting Caltrans to participate in today's discussion. It is something that the department also takes very seriously, and we have undertaken some important efforts and important steps to get us towards putting a program together. It generated a lot of excitement throughout the organization as we proceeded through this initial phase. We recognize that we do have a lot more to do. Similar to what Denzel has said, it's a long process and a lot that departments have to work through. But we are excited about what we have done, and that's what we want to share today. What we see as a key element to performance-based management is the development of a strategic plan that clearly lays out who we are as a department and what we want to accomplish. Included in the strategic plan, we have our goals, our objectives that basically set out what do we want to do, the strategies that tell us how we'll accomplish those objectives, the performance measures that tell us if we are on track or not, and then the values that define who we are, how we want to operate, how we guide our behavior within the department. So what we did, we went through an extensive process to develop our most recent strategic plan. To make that plan work, we wanted to secure buy-in from our employees. I mean, you mentioned earlier about an inclusive process. That is exactly what we as a department did. We included all of our employees to participate in every step of the development of the strategic plan. So that meant doing an outreach to our 22,000 employees throughout the state. And through that effort, we just completed an employee survey, and our employee survey results show that 88% of our employees are familiar with our mission vision statement. 83% of our employees feel that their work helps Caltrans fulfill its mission and vision. 76% feel that their values are clear to them, and that was 12% percentage points higher than before we went through this effort. 62% say that the values provide a meaningful framework for them to do their work, and 85% say that they have a clear understanding of how their work contributes to achieving Caltrans' goals. So going through that process really demonstrated that we were able to reach down through the organization, get their buy-in, have them build that process. And so that was a big hurdle, and it's something I think that really will help the department as we proceed through this implementation of a performance-based management program. So the steps that we took to get there, I want to kind of lay out and talk through our strategic planning process. Our most recent effort started in earnest after CPR, the governor's CPR effort, as well as our own agency secretary's performance improvement initiative. She had pulled together an expert review panel to take a look at all the departments, and Caltrans in particular had a transportation expert review panel, and they had some recommendations. And similar to CPR, the PII expert review panel pushed and said, accountability and transparency. We really need to have that, and we need to have performance measures to measure how we're performing, to share that, whether it's good or bad, and then to act on those results and use that to guide management decisions. After the PII effort within our agency, all of the departments within our agency were tasked to prepare what we called our program level action plans. And those were plans that aligned our program level resources to each of the respective departments' goals. In addition to that, we started to report on a key set of performance measures, and so we were reporting that on a quarterly basis. Additionally, under our agency, on a quarterly basis, correct? We also created what we call the Performance Improvement Council, or the PIC. The PIC includes representatives from all of the departments within the agency, and we were meeting pretty much on a monthly basis, where it was a forum for us to share best practices, lessons learned as we were all implementing performance-based management. So it was a good place for all of us to just have the dialogue, to share what was going on so that we can learn from each other and see what the other is implementing. As we were going through this, we took a step back and we saw that, our strategic plan was somewhat dated. Through the years, our goals had been tweaked here and there, word change here, a different goal here. And so we felt that we really need to go through an effort to update the plan, make sure that it would be a plan that would drive organizational change and improvement, drive informed budgetary decisions, and provide clear direction and force accountability. And really important is that a business shift needed to take place within the organization and a cultural change, because when we talk about performance measures and going back to accountability, sometimes there is a sense of angst somewhat about what would happen, how the information would be used. So we had to go through a learning process and educate and talk to everyone that, by having performance measures, it could be a help, it could be a resource to point to where help would be needed, and maybe resource changes or external help or whatever that may be. But it does help to lay out or point to things that need improvement and start that dialogue. So we started our work with our plan. Again, buy-in was important, and we invited all employees to participate, and then that meant for every element of the plan, starting with the goals, the mission statement itself, the values, the objectives and strategies, we asked employees to provide feedback for each one of those elements. So what we did was we had meetings for each one of those elements, and we asked all of our district directors, all the divisions within headquarters to conduct meetings with their employees. And that included having outreach to our field employees as well as office employees, going to their maintenance crews and giving them the opportunity to learn about the process and to get to provide feedback to that as well. We wanted to ensure that there was a consistent message throughout this process. We wanted to make sure that what we put out there was the same, so that we were soliciting uniform, consistent information back, and so it was presented in a uniform way. So what my staff, my team did, we prepared scripts for everyone, talking points for each of the meetings, the PowerPoint presentations, the questions that would be asked for each one of these meetings, as well as templates for them to fill out as they conducted the meetings, how they would solicit the information, and then it all came back to us in another template form so that my staff and I could compile all this and then come back with a recommendation to our team for each one of our strategic planning elements. Throughout this process, our director was emailing our employees with updates on what was happening throughout the process, as well as completing video messages to all employees. As we completed one phase before we started another, included in the PowerPoint presentation would be a feedback on how we used their feedback to develop one piece before we rolled on to the next one. So we did listen to our employees. We did take their feedback, and it was very important for us to incorporate that into our plan. For example, I'll go through each element very quickly so you can get a sense of what we did. Our mission statement, Caltrans improves mobility across California. That had been a long-standing mission statement. The survey that we had at that point, employee survey results, had indicated that 70% of our employees liked that mission statement. We also tested it with our external stakeholders. They had told us that that is the singleness of purpose for Caltrans. They felt that was the statement for us. So that stayed. It stuck. We kept that as is. Then we moved on to our goals. We had 5 goals that describe who we are, what we want to accomplish and achieve. Our employees said that some of the words did not make sense. They didn't understand what we meant by some of our goals. So we went back, took a look at that, and we tweaked a few words, and we made some updates to that. Our employees also said that the goals lack anything that had to do with the workforce as far as management's commitment to the employees and the employees' commitment to excellence. So as a result, we developed a service goal that addresses our employees and our workforce and how we want to make sure that we have a workforce that is committed to customer service. Then we also went through the values discussion. The values describe who we are, how we want to operate, and it guides our behavior. Our values used to be 8 words, just single words. We've tested that. Do they make sense to you? How do you feel about the values? And the feedback that we got was they're just too many words. They were words only. How do they relate to us as a department? They wanted some definition to that. So they provided some additional words to better describe what we meant by that. We took that feedback back, and we have now 4 values with a definition for each word. We went through a process of developing our objectives, very similar to what Denzel said as far as developing performance measures and having the team look at outcome-oriented type of measures, something that would drive our practices, improvement within the organization. Our management team came up with objectives for our plan, and then we wanted feedback from our employees to say, now that we know these are the objectives that we want to accomplish within the department, what are some of the strategies that you can suggest to us as to how we can do business better? What are new ways of doing business to accomplish these objectives? New ways of doing business or things that we can improve upon on how we do business. When we put that out and we went through the same process to get feedback, our employees said, wait a minute, you didn't ask us for feedback on the objectives. We would like to provide input there too. So we said, sure, we opened that up. And so we had a few tweaks here and there, but for the most part, the objectives stayed the way they are. But we did get hundreds and hundreds of suggestions as to how we could do business better, and we came up and they made suggestions to our strategies. At the end of the day, our staff went through all the strategies related to the different objectives. We went through a vetting process through the different layers within the organization, through the different experts, whether it was in our project delivery area, our maintenance and operations area, our planning area. We tested the strategies with them before it went back up to our management team for approval. And ultimately, our executive team approved each one of the elements, including all the strategies that are contained in our plan. And at the end of the day, we printed up the cards that were handed out to you that includes on one side the mission statement and the goals and what the values are. And these were printed and provided to all of our employees. And again, throughout this process too, we have been meeting with our external stakeholders to get feedback as to how does this look to them and just to kind of test the waters with them as well. And as I mentioned earlier, with some of the numbers from our employee survey, this process was validated by the results that we got from the survey, where we had such a high percentage of employees that really understand and they identify with what we have now laid out before us as far as our goals and values in particular, as well as our mission statement. So our final plan contains 5 goals, 4 value statements, 26 objectives that are all time dependent. There's a set timeline on when we're going to complete it and a specific target, and 99 strategies. We are now reporting on those particular performance measures related to the 26 objectives. We also have what we call maybe a lower level, second tier set of performance measures that measure how we're performing on key activities that would affect an outcome for a particular objective. So we also have that included in our quarterly report. And so we have a quarterly report that is posted on our intranet that is shared with our management team and for anyone who does visit our website. And we also have a link too for comments from whoever happens to hit the website to get feedback on the report itself. Is it understandable? Is there more that they would like to see? And so it is for public consumption. We're trying to use that report and have more focused dialogue within the department, similar to what Denzel said. We're trying to put together our management team and focus on some of the key measures and talk about where things are at, things that are not, say, hitting the right trend that we would like to see, talk about what's causing that, and what do we need to do to address it, to affect this outcome so that it would be on target. For the most part, our performance measures have, or our targets have a time to complete by 2012. What we have also done is we have set annual targets so that each year we know where we need to be in order to try to meet this ultimate target in 2012. Another step that we have taken within the department, our director has also executed or entered into contracts with all of his deputy directors and district directors. He has contracts for delivery with each of the 12 districts, where these are commitments for delivery of our capital projects. And then we also have contracts for performance and innovation with the deputy directors, which focuses on things that they're doing from a program perspective. So that's another thing that has been in place that is we're trying to tie it very closely to things that are outlined in our strategic plan. So we're trying to make that connection in linkage to everything that we do. Any proposals that are moved forward within the department, we try to link back to which strategy, what objective does that proposal support. So we're trying to incorporate that and institutionalize this process within the department. But again, this is at its infancy here as well. We are, starting this more regular formalized dialogue within the management team, looking at the performance report and having the conversation about it, and hoping that that will make the changes that we're talking about, hopefully seeing the more organizational improvements and things like that.
Assemblymember Buchanan.
Thank you. It sounds like you're doing a great job of establishing goals and building a culture that can support that. Could you give us sort of an example of one of your objectives and exactly what data you're using, what metrics to measure outcomes, and as a result of that, how it's caused you to, say, to allocate resources differently?
Well, we have, one of our goals is our delivery goal, and our delivery goal is efficiently deliver quality transportation projects and services. And included in that goal are our key project delivery milestones, meeting 100% delivery on all of our project milestones. So that is one of our performance measures. That is one of our key objectives. So by looking at that, then we can see what are the resources needed to deliver our capital program. And so that's one that has been in use actually for quite some time. Through this process, it's been expanded and strengthened by the contracts themselves, and then there has been actually been more dialogue on a monthly basis to talk about exactly what is happening in that area so that we can then focus, and then I think the resources are, again, lined up to meet the program delivery needs.
Have you had any situations where, by going through this process and having good objective data, you've been able to deploy resources more efficiently, where you've made decisions where, you know what, we don't seem to be accomplishing this, you know, we're spending money on this, but we're not meeting our objectives. We need to do something differently, or we need to deploy our resources differently. That kind of decision making.
That is something still underway and in development. We want to get to that point to have that dialogue. I would say within the programs, they are doing to some degree some of that. I think within maintenance is another program where they use the measures to see, you know, levels of service and determine trade-offs between this service in this area versus that. Across the board, we're trying to get to a point where we might be able to do that across programs, and we're working on that. We're not there yet.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. From CDCR, Mr. Seal.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Lee Seal. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff for the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. It's my pleasure to be here this morning and speak to this committee about CompStat. CompStat is our tool for measuring operational performance. It is, in brief, what it does is it makes department-wide data available to managers and supervisors on an ongoing comparative basis. So we can review this data, look at this data. It helps us to identify trends, spot issues, frame our key performance indicators, set our benchmarks for performance, whether that involves managing staff overtime and keeping those costs down, or tracking inmate academic completions, for example. So we follow a regular CompStat schedule. It involves reviewing all 33 prisons twice a year, all 4 parole regions twice a year. Recently, we have expanded CompStat into our headquarters areas as well, administration, my own areas, to ensure that headquarters is subject to the same kind of oversight and scrutiny as we've applied out to our prisons and our parole regions. So I think we're going to see some really strong benefits there in the upcoming months and years. We're on the one hand, CompStat, as Ms. Ma mentioned, is also in its infancy, like her operational tool, her measurement tool. But at the same time, we're really pleased with the recognition from the Little Hoover Committee. We're pleased to be here today. We've had the opportunity to speak to various law enforcement agencies and provide demonstrations to them. The Orange County Sheriff's Department, for example, the Oregon Youth Authority. Tomorrow we're going to be speaking to the New Jersey Department of Corrections and showing them CompStat and walking them through this. So it's at once both a young instrument and but also quickly growing stronger every day and becoming quite robust. I'd like to acknowledge some of the staff who've been part of this effort in the last year or so to really make this strong. We've been invited by the committee to show us a few slides, so I'd like to invite them up here today. We have joining us Richard Krupp, he's the Assistant Secretary of Audits and Compliance, and Carol Avancino, who is the Chief of CompStat. Carol's going to walk us through a few slides and show this committee exactly what we're talking about with CompStat. So I'll turn it over to them. Thank you.
Say a couple of words firstly. My name is Richard Krupp. I'm the Assistant Secretary of Audits and Compliance, and CompStat is part of the area that I manage. And just to give you a little background, we took over this particular function around the end of 2007 or beginning of 2008. And prior to that, we had a kind of a manual system that was headquarters driven, and we required the institutions to gather a lot of information, send it up to headquarters, and then we'd have quarterly meetings. When my office took over that operation, we reversed the process. So rather than asking the field to collect data, I wanted to go into various automated systems that the department already had, pull the data out, and provide that to the field so that we would help them with their work, help them manage their operation better. And that concept was put into effect when I hired Carol and Michael, which was around April of 2008. And from April of 2008 to July 1st is the implementation schedule. In that 90-day period, we got our system up and running. We didn't get any additional funding for it. There was no money that we put out for this. And we're going to give you a demonstration of how this works. And as Lee mentioned, we've got it working in all the prisons, all the parole regions, all the DJJ facilities now. And it's quite an impressive operation, I think you'll see, for very little cost.
Is this a commercial system?
We use something called SharePoint from Microsoft. It's kind of an off-the-shelf software program that we already had in the department. So we kind of looked inside the box instead of outside the box. And with that, I'll turn it over to Carol, and we'll give you a little demonstration. This is a live demonstration.
Good morning. Good morning, esteemed committee members, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about something I'm very passionate about and something that the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation is very passionate about, and that is our CompStat process. CompStat is a process in which we review statistical information and trends to identify key performance indicators and identify possible areas of risk within our operational areas. By using this information to highlight possible areas of risk, we can identify potential problems early and implement strategies to correct and improve our business processes in order to improve our operational performance. And with that, I'd like to show you some slides that actually show our system. And going in order of the agenda that was sent to us, we'll talk about our implementation process. And Michael, if you could go back to the last slide. I want to talk about this. This is a technical slide, but it talks about the 30 different systems within the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation that we pull over 300 million bits of data each month. These systems are various systems that are either legacy that have been in our environment for several decades to brand new systems that are coming online, such as our BIS application. We pull data from these systems and we dump them in, for a lack of a better term, we dump them into one container, which allows us to process that data and give all levels of management and staff within our organization access to that information. We present that information through our intranet portal, and we also have the ability to give our external stakeholders, such as the Office of Senate Research and the Office of the Inspector General, access to it through a secure logon. With that, we wanted to talk about results and status of the program. The status of the program is we have a fully functional portal that gives anybody that has access to this information the ability to look at our operation, from our schedule to previous meetings that have occurred, our dashboards with benchmarks, our reporting portal, which also has an ad hoc option to it. So we have some reports that are automatically generated each month that we provide not only to the Office of the Inspector General, but we also post them on the Governor's Transparency website as part of our goal to meet the transparency needs for California. In addition to the portal and the reports, we have automated dashboards. Those dashboards are at-a-glance view for anybody in the department that wants to monitor performance in key areas. The beauty of these dashboards is they're not static. We use these dashboards as to track emerging trends. So if we have data in a particular area and we need to monitor it at a very high level, we can implement a dashboard, an electronic dashboard, in a matter of days that allows our management teams to track performance in a particular area at their desktop. So basically, this is your 5-minute view each morning when you're coming into the office. Beyond the dashboards, one of the things that we did very early on in re-engineering this process was to publish a standard set of counting rules. These counting rules are our Bible. They are how we operate. It tells what we collect, where we collect it from, and the rules in which we pull this information. All of our stakeholders, both internal and external, have access to this information, and it makes our process very transparent. Additionally, when we implemented this process back in July of 2008, we did not receive funding for this, so we needed to come up with an innovative way to train people who would have access to this portal without having any training dollars. And the way that we did that was we implemented online interactive training through the portal. So anybody that wants to know how to run a report can click on the online interactive instructions for running a report, and they can go through that step by step, learning the process at their desktop, and then have the ability to run their own reports or access the information that they seek. Beyond the online training, we prepared some best practices and lessons learned. We really learned some strategic things in implementing this process over the last couple of years, and one of the fundamental thing was to have a governance process that was not only supported by our executive management but all areas of our organization. And the way that we did that was we established a framework for governance which determines how and when we make changes to what we collect. We call it CompStat Open Enrollment. And what that is twice a year, we roll up the feedback that we receive from our customers and our business partners, which we collect on the portal. Anybody can log into the portal and make a suggestion on how we should collect something or maybe a better way of doing business. We roll that up into a governance calendar, and then that is reviewed by an executive governance committee, and that's how we make changes to the CompStat process. So it really reaches into all levels of the organization. Additionally, it was very important for us to provide continuous follow-up and feedback and proof of practice of what we do. So as we go into each correctional institution, each DJJ facility, each regional parole entity, and we conduct these baseline reviews, we have the ability to capture follow-up tasks or areas of performance that we want to monitor. We capture it as a task item in the portal, and then we capture the proof of practice that would complete the particular follow-up. So in this particular instance, this was a proof of practice from the very first meeting that we conducted on July 1st, 2008, where we needed some additional space for substance abuse programming. The associate director gave the particular warden, which was Mr. Kramer at the time, instructions to make some contacts and seek some additional programming space. Mr. Kramer did so. He entered in his proof of practice. That particular issue was closed out. You can see now we can go back 2 years and look at what we did as an organization to improve our performance in a particular area, and we have an archival record. Beyond that, we are really, we feel that transparency really built our credibility, with not only internally but externally. And the way that we were able to develop that credibility is providing all of our customers and our stakeholders access to the actual data that we receive. So from those 30 different systems, we pull in different reports, and what we do is we post those actual reports onto the portal. So if there's ever any question about data that's contained in a CompStat report, they can go back to the original source and verify that CompStat has in fact reported the correct data. So that has gone a long way in building our relationship with our customers and with our external stakeholders. And then the last thing that we do that's incredibly important for us is to publish our common findings and provide that information in a way that anybody can see it. And right now we are currently posting our CompStat reports on the Governor's Transparency site. We are also looking at additional initiatives and partnerships with the Office of the State Chief Information Officer in developing an online database with all state agencies to provide data in a way that anybody in the public can access it, not just a static report. So we're looking forward to those opportunities in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all of our panelists. Since we just took you all at once, it'll be kind of a free-for-all at this point. Anybody wishing? Assemblymember Hagman.
Thank you. And these are general questions. I'm just trying to get an understanding how our departments a little bit work. Coming from the private sector, we have to a lot of checks and balances a lot of times. So in general, the first question would be, as managers or department heads, those type of things, what incentives do we give you, or the governor gives you, to actually build a better mousetrap, to do it cheaper, do it better, do it faster? And how do you get recognized, besides a pat on the back or a citation letter, that you actually have accomplished doing something more efficient in all the rest? Second question, again, general questions. A lot of times we get very good at what we do, but not all that we do is part of our function. So if you build roads and Caltrans, you may not be the best at IT, or you may not be the best at other management skills. When can you, or what process you go through to hire outside consultants who may be efficiency experts in those fields that you're not expertise at. And then the last general question on this part would be, we have your internal performance measures that you set and you seek and you go toward. But how do you know what's the reality of that? Do you compare that to the private sector, whatever equivalent that is? Maybe you don't have a private sector equivalent, but maybe you have another state agency that does the same thing in a different state. And, price per linear foot of freeway, or, inmate incarceration rate, and how much does it cost you? How do you know that you're actually doing it? And how do you find out if you're not comparable to their rates or whatever? What do you see as the differences? And then from that information, you hopefully give us feedback and say, what can we do as a legislature to give you either more tools in the toolbox or release some regulations that make you do things in certain ways that may not be so efficient? General questions, but don't pass.
Thank you. I'll venture an answer. I appreciate the comments and questions. Taking them in order, you asked how to reward this kind of behavior, further motivate these kinds of results. And I think, first of all, this committee goes a long way. So we really thank you and thank the attention of everyone being here today, this opportunity to talk through this and share some information and figure out how we can do things better. So we appreciate that in the immediate context. And obviously, the further context is that the legislature obviously can move the departments toward linking performance with budget. That's obvious. I believe the vice chair made that point very eloquently earlier today. I think that is something that we welcome. We welcome that kind of oversight, and we welcome that kind of reward. As to the second point, hiring consultants, as Dr. Krupp pointed out just a minute ago, so far we've been lucky enough to draw upon the internal expertise of the people sitting next to me and to take an off-the-shelf product and really make it work. So, in this time of the budgetary challenges that we're looking at, we face, I'll be candid, we're going to do everything we can to save every penny by looking in-house for internal expertise. And I really am thankful that we've got it. It's sitting right next to me. Finally, how can we compare it to national standards? This is the future generation for us of CompStat. We're looking now at not just comparing offices and divisions within our own department against one another. That's extremely valuable, and that's really the bread and butter of what we do. But we've also recently been in conversations with the Association of State Correctional Administrators, ASCA, which is kind of our national body of correctional experts and leaders, directors. And they have kind of a CompStat-like program on a national level where states are beginning to participate. It's not completely up and running. It's not full participation yet, but it's underway. And it's the same kind of process on a national scale where we agree upon counting rules, we start plugging in information so that we can give this committee real information about apples to apples comparison, so we can have an honest assessment of our inmate mortality rates, let's say, inside our prisons, or our recidivism rates, because from our perspective, some of those statistics get used and thrown around a lot, but as we all know, we can make a statistic say anything, and sometimes the picture, in our case, we believe it is much better than the statistics would suggest.
Mr. Chair, let me follow up on a couple of those too. And I appreciate that because, as you know, I'm working on some of the correction reforms and stuff, but this is what, from a grassroots effort from our constituents, they're looking at, okay, why does it cost California X amount to put someone in prison versus X amount someplace else? Right. And we need to go back to say, well, we're going to make it better so we're compatible, or we can't because it is apples and oranges. Let me tell you why. So I think we need to be always focused on that thing. And then on the budgetary process, I don't sit on the budget sub whatever at this point, so I can't tell you how that works. But from my observations of the budget, generally, if you cut your budget down, hey, we're not going to give you any more. So as you become more efficient, you actually get penalized for becoming more efficient versus being rewarded to become more efficient. It seems like we reward failure. When things are going bad, we throw more money at it. When things are going good, we take money away. And I think we need to, as a legislature, look at different ways rewarding performance and efficiency and other ways to actually penalize those who are not doing so well. So not just coming back to us and say, hey, you did a good job, you cut X 10% or whatever, but no, we need to give you, and what I'm looking for is feedback on why you can't do your job better or more efficient based on the rules and regulations that we set up on you maybe 20 years ago that we don't even know that's there. Sure. You know, the chairman had one of the first committees on reports that corrections was doling out, or all our departments. There was, we take out 1,200, Hector, or something like that? 1,600 reports. We had no clue those were in there. But that's kind of feedback you need to get back to us and say, you're tying our hands to make a very inefficient system less efficient, or these are things you could do to make things better. And that's why I think it's important to kind of look at the actual product, not just the internal mechanisms, because this is great that you get organized internally so you get track things. But when it comes down to actual product that we give to our residents of California, whether that be a cost per inmate or linear foot of freeway or whatever the case we may be doing, that we could say that we're compatible or we're as competitive as possible with A, the private sector, and B, the other government agencies throughout the United States that are doing the same type of thing. And if not, why? So we can make those decisions and say, well, we're paying too much for this, or we're putting too much restrictions on that, or this is worth it. The cost is worth it to us. But at least we understand why that is.
Do either of you want to respond to some or all of that?
I'll respond to some part of that.
Okay.
I agree with what Lee has said as far as to question one. I think forums like this, the opportunities to share will really help move this a lot further. With respect to the second question and some of the expertise, one of the things that we did among agency or departments within agency, we were able to try to leverage expertise between the departments, because one of the things I didn't mention that we also created within the departments in agency is a reporting system. We tried to develop what we called our performance-based management system, and that was all developed with Caltrans staff in coordination with other IT staff from the other departments, utilizing existing licenses that we had within Caltrans, and we developed a system where we were trying to pull all the data from the different departments into one repository, and then we would have a dashboard with all of the departments, key performance measures, and then the more detailed charts and graphs for the rest of the measures. And so we were going through a process developing that, and we had a pilot of that. But again, it was trying to utilize and capitalize existing resources, knowing that resources were very tight and limited. So there is some opportunities there where we are communicating with other departments to gain expertise along those lines. As far as comparisons, Caltrans, when we developed our performance measures, we did look at national standards. What are some of the benchmarks that are being used on a nationwide basis or among other state DOTs? Among state DOTs, there is a lot of work trying to develop comparative measures that all states could use so that there will be something consistently set. One thing about performance measures, a lot of times it depends on the data that's collected. A lot of times different organizations, other states may report on the same measure, but maybe pull the data a little bit differently. So there's been a lot of work to make sure there is that consistency so that then we can start comparing and then see and learn from each other. How are they doing? Are we at the same level? Are we meeting the national standards and working along those lines? So Caltrans has been part of that effort, and we did compare ourselves to others as we were seeing where we are at, and then setting the targets accordingly so that we can make improvements within the organization. So we did that.
Well, again, just to follow up again so I understand, we have a huge network of roads, freeways, all this, and this demands that you must manage. And again, there is more to laying a linear foot of freeway to compare apples and apples with the private sector. I do know, because we just had this landslide on 57 freeway or 210 near my district, that we had to do emergency contract out for private sector. But to have those comparables, like this is what it's costing us, whatever standard you use, and hopefully the rest of the states can agree upon that and report correctly so we can see that, for maintenance per foot, for laying down per foot, or whatever benchmarks they are, and then also on the private side. and then having those kind of benchmarks come back to us, and we could say, is it 3 times as much? Why is that? And help us understand why that difference is there would be beneficial. So not just internally that you're meeting your goals, but you have to compare it to something else to know if you're reaching benchmarks or not.
Agree.
If I may answer directly Assemblymember Hagman's question, when you're on outside comparisons, we use Environmental Protection Agency data. But the Environmental Protection Agency data isn't very useful for us because when you compare California, with the exception of a couple of the larger states, the data doesn't match, and California regulates some hazardous substances that no other state regulates, fluff. That's the leftover, I'm not a scientist, it's the leftover junk after you can recycle everything you've recycled. So we regulate fluff, no one else does. So those comparisons are really difficult. But that doesn't mean we can't look at the private sector for some tremendous advice. And we've used the California Council for Excellence and adopted the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Standards, which excellent businesses throughout the United States use, as our management framework. That way we can look at what those businesses are doing, and we can compare with what we're doing. And we're preparing right now a document to submit to the California Council for Excellence as an audit. They have examiners that then review the document and compare it with private enterprise and other government agencies and basically rate how you're doing and where you can improve and where there's areas for improvement and where you're doing well.
One more question, Mr. Chair, then I know I take up more of my chair time this morning. I appreciate this topic. But I was going to say also that occasionally what you may be able to do for spot checking yourself is, like, I'll use the Caltrans example again, is that if you had to bid that out through your department to do that emergency slide repair, it would have cost you X. And then you put out an RFQ, RFP for emergency contract to do that. And you actually got a price for whatever that was. And we could do that in several different things. We're building a facility for corrections, or we're doing stuff. And some of that stuff's making, but some of it's services as well, if you were to outsource some of that. And not the whole system, because you can't even put your arms around the whole system. It's such a big agency. But specific jobs, you could spot check yourself, maybe internal costs versus external costs. You would hope that sometimes the internal costs may be a little more advertised out, and you may be able to do it cheaper, but sometimes the timing is you need to go outside. But that's something you give us feedback sometimes on individual projects. Like when we internalized this bid, it was X. When we went outsourced for the bid, it was X plus Y. That would give us a sense of comfort that at least, hey, we're in the ballpark. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Before I have Assemblymember Pettis ask his question, we have a quorum, so we're going to go ahead and take roll.
De la Torre.
Here.
Strickland. Arambula. Berryhill. Here. Block. Here. Buchanan. Here. Caballero. Emerson. Here. Fletcher. Here. Fuentes. Hagman. Here. Huber. Jeffries. Here. Jones. Lowenthal. Perez.
Here.
Valines.
Also, I wanted to staff distributed this draft steps for implementing performance measurement program. I want to be clear, this is not a recommendation in the normal sense, because today's an informational hearing. These are just some ideas of how you would go about implementing a performance measurement program. Very superficial. I've already added 2 things just from the conversation here that I think need to be part of this. I want, at the end, we'll have a brief discussion about what this should look like to carry it over into further discussions on performance measurement. And I think that there is a desire by some folks to move toward performance-based budgeting, but this will be the first step to try to, again, broaden the process of performance measurement. So as you're listening to all the questions and all the answers, think about other things that need to be a part of this so that we can shape it to move forward on this subject. Assemblymember Pettis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. Good morning to all of you as well. I appreciate your efforts and your work this is not easy, especially when it hasn't been done for years. And we hear a lot about aligning revenues with expenditures. But part of the challenge, obviously, with that has been the fact that we haven't been measuring for success. So part of the reason why perhaps we are not doing that and spending maybe more than we should is for that specific reason. We are not investing our dollars where programs or projects or programs or projects that actually work. And so I appreciate your efforts and your work. It's about time that we do this. And I really just want to emphasize that I appreciate the efforts of Caltrans. All of you are doing great work, but specifically Caltrans because of their efforts in taking this into action. I call that action-based evaluation, which means that you actually went into your organization, and because I read your one-pager, and you talked to all your employees or a majority of your employees to really find out what their thoughts are. And so them having a voice in the evaluation process allows them to think of this in a way in which it's not punitive, but rather in a way in which we are trying to improve and we're trying to refine and we're trying to be more effective and we're trying to be more efficient. The fact that you're going out of your way to get that type of buy-in, the fact that you're framing, the fact that you're messaging, and you're also providing simple tools like this, it goes a long way, where you have your mission, your vision, your goals, the values in a card that perhaps every worker can have in their pocket as they're out there doing their job, and they can hand out to someone that might, come to them, or they just want to review something. I think that's very, very important when it comes to accountability. Now, I come from the nonprofit world, and in the nonprofit world, we have had to do continuous accountability, and we've had to always make sure that we measured for success. From creating our mission statement and our values, first and foremost with the strategic plan that has a mission statement with values, obviously setting your benchmarks, your outputs, your inputs, your targets, your timelines, your outcomes, your different tools that you're going to be using to measure success. If we don't do any of that, we don't get funded. And I think that my message here, when it comes to this, if the nonprofit world has to do this, right? If local school districts need to do this line of work, which I know they do, if our local city councils need to do this, then I believe that our state agencies and departments should be doing this as well. And there are models out there in which can demonstrate to all of us here that we can figure this out. And you yourselves, I think, are a model. So I have a few questions for you. Just trying to think through this, and as well maybe, I don't want to say push back, but raise a question or two to have you reflect and think through this for the future. Because I've had these challenges, and I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer. Part of this struggle that I see with trying to figure out how we can measure success is the issue of how do you balance the internal with the external. And what that means is how do you balance, for example, the internal, the inputs, the resources that you're putting in, the processes, meaning the delivery, right, within the organization, and having some sort of balance with the external, meaning the outputs, right, the services that you're delivering, and the outcomes, the overall results. I found that to have been very difficult in my years doing nonprofit work. Because on one end, I'm working on the internal to make sure that we sustain ourselves, making sure that staff and employees have an ethos of will and wanting to work and coming to work motivated, while at the same time making sure that at the end of the day, we are delivering our services and the outcomes that we're trying to achieve are reached. by our clients, our constituents, or whoever we are trying to serve. And so I just want to raise that question and get your thoughts on that. And this might help in one way or another as you are moving forward with your processes.
You know, that was one of the struggles that we had. I mean, kind of looking at, we're looking at customer service as well, and what we do, and when we look at our overall mission statement, Caltrans improves mobility, that's what it's all about. So it was a balance, looking at our outcomes and recognizing that we want to provide a safe facility. We want to provide mobility where there's, reduced congestion. People can get through quickly and safely without delay. And so we put those out as our objectives, and we wanted those to be things that we know that as a department we need to deliver these services. Then the things below that, the strategies, are things now, how do we as an organization, what do we need to do to make sure that happens? In some cases, we need to take a look at ourselves at how do we change our processes to make sure that that can happen? Are there things that we can streamline, do more efficiently to make sure that we keep in mind that ultimate goal? So we're trying to find that balance. But yes, I agree with you that a lot of times it does get kind of confused and lost, but we are trying to take that step to kind of keep that separation and keep that ultimate outcome in mind. And that was the process that we went through with our current strategic plan. And then at the same time, too, we want to demonstrate to the public how we're performing in those areas. And so by putting things out on the dashboards, we want to put things for public consumption so they can understand, what are we doing? How are we helping them to get there? And that's been a constant struggle as well. What are the relevant pieces of information that would be meaningful to the public, but yet at the same time, we might need it in a different form for us to use as a management tool. And that's also a struggle as far as what type of performance measures would be relevant for the public to understand and for us to be able to use as a management tool. And that's something that we're still struggling with.
In the SIPOC model that you've mentioned, the supplier input, process, outcome, and output, and consumer, we've been focusing on the process improvement itself because we have very little control over the suppliers within state government. That's pretty much regulated for us. Whether that's good or bad is not a value judgment, it's just the way it is. But focusing on the process and process improvement that the metrics lead us to, we can at least use the maximum efficiency for the resources that we're getting and the people that we have. So we have a constant loop of evaluating what our people are doing through our project management and process improvement efforts.
I would answer the question, to use your phrase, I also see it as a feedback loop where to be able to point to data that demonstrates success, that demonstrates outcomes, or even demonstrates issues for improvement. That is what drives the internal, the commitment of resources, the commitment to process. I think the difficulty at times without a system like CompStat or without a system of measuring performance is, the motivation isn't there. When you make information available, you make it transparent, you put it in front of managers, you can't help but take notice of it. You can't help but be accountable for it. You can't help but care about it. You see those numbers up there, and with your boss sitting next to you, guaranteed you're going to try to improve.
A little bit more motivation, huh?
Sure, absolutely.
I was wondering as well, I heard a lot about measurements and evaluation on the internal, which is important. That's why we're here. But I'm just wondering as well, how do you know when your clients or those that you are serving are satisfied? How do you measure that? In other words, for example, Caltrans. I just give you an example. Back in my district, for example, there are some folks in certain areas that may want a certain job done, right? And let's say you go out there and you get the job done. But how do we know that the folks in that community are happy with that job?
One of the things that we have done, we do external customer surveys. and we get feedback from the public as well as our stakeholders as far as what do they see as the priorities? How well do they see us meeting what they identify as their priorities or their areas, and to tell us what they feel are the priorities, and how well are we providing service to them? Are we being responsive? Are we being timely? So we do customer surveys every other year is what we've been doing. We did the last one a couple of years ago. So that's one feedback loop to see exactly, and that is one of our performance measures. When we look at our service goal and we talk about the employees, but we're also talking about how we're providing service, and we take the results from the employee survey, and that is one of our objectives and one of our measures.
Mm-hmm. In DTSC, we ask our constituents. We hold public hearings in specific sites that are getting cleaned up in areas where the community has a vested interest. And the communities where we hold those really have no problem telling us what they think. That's not an issue. Besides that, we have an external advisory group made up of approximately 30 individuals external to the department that provide feedback to us on a quarterly basis so that we get a state of California perspective. And then in specific sensitive cleanup areas, environmental justice communities, where the toxic levels are high and are also probably the most disadvantaged areas of California. In those areas, we actually partner with community groups to take tours of sites before taking specific actions. Because it's one thing to do an enforcement activity in an environmental justice community, but then the issue of jobs becomes a critical issue. And they're very complex. And I don't know that we have all the answers, but by working with the community, we can certainly take a better tact than we would do as bureaucrats going in and saying, this is our job, you're busted. That's just not what we can do with community input.
I'd answer that the CompStat process helps us serve our customers in a few ways. On one level, we have a relationship between our headquarters in CDCR in the field, the prisons, the parole units, and the CompStat process provides a really eye-opening insight, a window into our deployment of resources between the two. We go to the meetings. I, for example, get an opportunity to see in a very tangible way photographs or hear from a warden, this is the kind of support we need in our plan operations, or here's how our budget is being impacted, and forces us to reprioritize, look at, what can we do to help support the field? What can we do to make those resources available? So there's that. There's the field as a customer on the one hand, and then there's the field in the sense of some of our external stakeholders, such as our auditing colleagues, the Office of the Inspector General, the Bureau of State Audits, Department of Finance. CompStat has a process, or our internal audits led by Dr. Krupp. If his office sees that there's some area where we need improvement, or one of our external auditors sees that there's an area where we need improvement, it's very easy, and we do it all the time, to roll those performance measures right into CompStat to say, this is something we need to keep an eye on because one of our external customers or one of our internal checks says we need to do better in this regard. And then finally, we're in the process of finalizing our strategic plan, and some of that will include feedback from the public in various parts of our department. And once we have that finalized, I certainly anticipate that there'll be elements of our strategic plan that we'll want to lift right into our CompStat process, and we'll say, this is something that can be quantified, this can be measured, we want to put this into CompStat and see how we're doing.
Just one last thought, if I may, Mr. Chair. I appreciate your points there as well. Yeah, too often what I've learned is the public or constituents or those that we're trying to serve are not asked, how did it go for you? Did you receive the service effectively, efficiently, or like you wanted it to. And I think that's a piece of the puzzle that's often missed. The internal is important, but as well the external, I think, is equally as important. This goes back to that balance. This is sometimes very difficult, right? And so as you're moving forward, and the work that you've done already, how do you prioritize which job should be done before another? How do you prioritize, for example, if you have arsenic in water in eastern Coachella Valley, and that being a major concern and issue, versus arsenic in water, for example, in the Central Valley, in a small community known as Cutler Arosi? How do you decide which project you should take on first? Or how do you prioritize, for example, a highway in the city of Calexico, in which a school is adjacent to it, and perhaps there needs to be some changes, versus an intersection somewhere in the Central Coast, in which perhaps needs some new additions? How does that play into the evaluation process, if it does at all?
Well, obviously, that can be a difficult process, and it's going to be a case by case, different kinds of projects. You're going to have to use different tools to evaluate. But at the very bottom, what the CompStat process does is at least makes data available to us. You can't underscore it enough to say that what kind of decisions can you make without at least having data, looking at it, making it available, helping to inform your decisions, to finally pull that together, to make that data available. That's where we can look at some bottom line numbers, whether it's budget numbers, whether it's population management, whatever the resource is. Most of the time it can be quantified and it can be put in front of us. You get the right people in the room, and you make those tough decisions.
Any other thoughts from anyone else?
Same thing. I mean, when you talk about projects, I mean, we go through similar projects, like you said, with data. For every project that moves forward, there is quite a bit of analysis to document why a project is needed. And again, the data is very important to show what is going on out there, why do we need it, and by doing a project, what will it get for us? So we do need to pull that data together and then use that for the analysis. And then it is a difficult decision when there are so many competing priorities and which way do you go. But having that basic information will really help make those kind of decisions, and that's what we want to get to.
How about yourself, sir?
Yeah, and first of all, this is beyond my area of expertise. But that said, I'm not going to dodge your question. In the two examples you gave, the priorities would be equal. Department of Toxic Substances Control has to act. When you're dealing with people, whether it's Central Valley and a water plume that's all of a sudden unacceptable, or in the middle of Los Angeles, there's no question those are equal priorities. The more difficult decisions are when the metrics are showing in a rural area where that's sparsely populated. Yes, we still have scientists acting on it, but the critical nature of the Central Valley and the critical nature of where the bulk of the population centers are where we really have to focus. One of the things we don't have yet, but we're hoping to in the next year, is a geographical overlay on where are our hazardous sites and where is human health and the environment most affected, i.e. medical data that comes from hospitals or the community itself. Once we have that, we actually will have a much better way to prioritize and work with other agencies on the critical issues that are surfacing.
Well, thank you for all that. And I just want to add on to Mr. Hagman's point earlier. I do agree that we need to have comparisons at the national level within comparing states with ours. But because of the fact that we are the 8th largest economy in the world, I would also emphasize the fact that maybe we should look at other nation states and see what they're doing, especially if we are competing globally now. and making sure that we bring jobs to the state of California, we need you to be up to par and be as efficient and as effective as you can be. And then we here in the state legislature need to make sure that we create the conditions necessary for you to do a good job. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Buchanan.
Thank you. I'm a strong proponent of performance-based budgeting and data-driven decision-making. I've managed it in both the private sector and brought it into our school district, and I know it works, and I know it helps us do things more efficiently and allocate our resources in a better way. I also know in both the private and public sector that when you try and make change, you usually get 10 reasons why you can't instead of one reason why you can. And so I just want to start out by applauding all of you for what you've done, because in difficult times, you've taken the initiative to move forward and create your data systems without additional resources and really drive your agencies forward. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate the can-do attitude. My concern isn't just in our day-to-day decision-making. It's in what I observe in California, where seems like we're just continually penny-wise and pound-foolish. And I want to use a Caltrans example there. You know, we know that if we spend $1 maintaining our roads in the first 80% of the wear, that we save money, because if we wait till the last 20%, we're going to spend $6 to $10. And so when I take a look at our resources, you know, part of the question that I think ultimately needs to be answered is, what kind of investment do we need to make so we're sure we're spending the $1 and not the $6 or $10? Because I think in the long run, some of what we do in terms of how allocating our resources actually not to anything that has to do with the decision making you're doing, but results in our not spending taxpayer dollars wisely. You know, if our roads were brought up to a level of maintenance and we committed to maintaining them, we'd save billions of taxpayer dollars, and they'd have better roads, and we'd be much more efficient. So, you know, the same thing with corrections. You know, I'm really impressed with the CompStat system, and you know, we've had some talk and briefings about it as a caucus, and we're going to have great data that's going to allow us to say we have to put emphasis on making sure that our prisoners get their GED or training or whatever, so that we know what's most effective. And ultimately, by doing that, you know, you're going to become more efficient. And when we do release, you know, people have served their terms, when we release them out into society, they're going to be able to get a job. They're not going to commit another crime, so we're going to be safer. We're going to save the state money, and it works for all of us. So I guess I'm interested long term, and you probably can't answer this now, but how we actually use that data not only to do our day-to-day planning, but to look at the bigger picture in terms of what is it we're trying to accomplish and what's the most effective way and efficient way to do that. So again, I get back to we're not penny wise and pound foolish, because we can't do everything in California at the most expensive dollar. We've got to do it in a way that we spend taxpayer dollars much more efficiently. And I might add, you know, when I first decided to run for assembly, my campaign consultant said, do you have any newspaper clippings? I was on school board, and I said, actually, I believed if I'm doing my job well, I'm not in the paper, the students are. And to a large extent, that's I understand how it's so hard to measure customer service, because people just want to drive on the roads and not have potholes and if you're not getting complaints, you're doing something that's right. Same thing with DTSC or the Department of Corrections. I mean, people want government to work. So
part of the issue is a structural issue. We don't have a performance-based budget. And by the way, that's not a comment on behalf of DTSC. I guess I should have said that. But if we had a performance-based budget, you would get that information to make those policy decisions based on the performance metrics supplied by the departments that are important to the legislature and to the administration. Absent that, though, some type of framework where at least departments are supplying you information would also help make that, because obviously if a department comes in, we know internally where our weaknesses are, but I think the last thing I'm going to do as any member of a department is come up to the legislature saying, golly, we're really messing up today. That's a technical performance management term. You're not going to hear that, but if we show you the data and the trend charts, you're able to ask the questions and make the policy decisions.
Sure, we appreciate the comments and concur with those comments as well. Part of the process certainly requires a certain degree of fearlessness. We're committed to looking at this data. We're committed to making this data available and transparent, and that means the good and the bad and the ugly. All of it goes up there. The bad is just as useful as the good because it helps us prioritize resources and helps this committee prioritize resources. One of the other areas I oversee is the Office of Research, and I'm committed to research, and sometimes I love it equally well when we find out something doesn't work at all, because we really can check it off the list and learn from that mistake or move forward and find out where we can better allocate our money and better allocate our resources.
Another effort that we're taking that's very much related to what you're talking about, related to the work that we're doing here, is really implementing an asset management framework within the department, really looking how can we best manage our assets, looking at longer term life cycle costs, how do we account for that so that when we make an improvement, how do we make sure that we have the resources necessary to make sure that they are taken care of. And so we're trying to see how do we come up with an analysis, how can we demonstrate that. As it is right now, when we look at our pavement, we know that pavement condition is always an issue. And so one of our measures relates to pavement condition. Some of our charts and graphs in the past that we've shown is this is where pavement condition is going, or this is how much more it's getting worse. This is what the funding is needed to make it happen so that we can bring that curve down so that we have less pavement that is bad. But it depends on how much money is available at a particular time. But we're trying to make that comparison, use that information to share with folks to say, this is what it is, and then also again doing a better job of kind of planning ahead. How can we better plan ahead for the future? So that is another ongoing effort that we have within the department related to asset management.
And I assume you're also able to look at, as things change, when you talk about pavement, if one technique, pavement lasts X years and different, it lasts Y years, so even though the other may cost 10% more, if you're looking at life cycle management, if you get 50% more wear out of it, then it's a good investment. And I guess I would go back to picking up on what Senator Hagman said, in that we shouldn't penalize you for doing things efficiently and better, and hopefully if we move in the direction of performance-based budgeting, we'll actually find a way to reward people for doing that.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. I don't think anybody else does, and then we'll go on to these steps. I think the way I look at all of this, and it all gets back to the role of government. It's the societal good. It's the whole reason we have government. Otherwise, it would just be companies doing their business, people doing their thing, and it would be a free-for-all. So it all comes back to the societal good, and each one of you does a component of societal good. And so that has to be always the focus of what you do on a day-to-day basis. Obviously, performance measurement, you break it down into its component parts. So I have a series of questions along the lines of what we're discussing. Start dates for each of you. Just from what I gleaned from the reading and from what you were saying, DTSC, you started 2007?
Correct.
Caltrans the same?
Our strategic planning efforts started in late 2006. We completed it in late 2007.
Okay. And then 2008 for you?
We implemented the automated system you see today on July of 08.
08.
We had other performance measures prior to that. This is since July of 08.
Okay. When will, you said it would take about 3 to 4 years to do something, so when will you be fully implemented?
We hope by this time next year, we will be fully implemented. With one caveat, there's always the continuous improvement you're going to have to do.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of metrics that will take much longer because the collection of the data is so complex.
Okay.
I would say maybe same time frame. We have most of our pieces in place. We're still working on our data systems, and it's continuous improvement along those lines. We're starting the dialogue in the next month to have the regular formal forums, and hopefully that will then push it further. So I would say it'll be more, say, in place within the next year.
And for CDCR, we are currently implementing the last phase of CompStat, whereby we're bringing in administration, juvenile justice, and a couple other areas of the department. That process has just begun, so that we are collecting that data in this 6-month period. We'll begin looking at that data, rolling it up. So I think really we're looking at a 6-month window for us to be
by the end of the year.
Sure.
I'm also interested in the differentiation between social type programs and physical programs. Clearly, you can quantify what Caltrans does, I think, a lot easier, and then a lot of what DTSC does. It's very physical, very tangible stuff. CDCR, I think, is more societal or social. It's what happens with these people when you do these certain things. Are there components that are social in yours, and are there components that are physical in yours? Obviously, there's space issues at CDCR, we know that. But is it all just pretty much on the one track?
For DTSC, no. It's actually is primarily social, hence the need for us to integrate the health databases with the work we do, because the impact of site cleanup or non-site cleanup really is affecting individuals and their health. DTSC is the most difficult organization I've worked with to set measures for because it's regulatory. We don't own the world that we're setting measures for. It's not like state parks. It's not like some of the other departments where you can really get your hand around the work you're doing. So it's been difficult. But that said, we have to constantly look at the societal impact as well as the environmental with the physical cleanups we're doing. And just because the data is hard to get doesn't mean we shouldn't try to get it. In fact, one of our internal things are, if a manager says this is going to be hard, we say, please don't let us ask you to do something hard in your 8-hour day. So that's DTSC's kind of mental attitude.
I like that attitude.
I think we have a little bit of both. I think you're right. For the most part, it's physical, but then some of the things that we're doing and outcomes are affecting maybe public driver behaviors. There's things as far as making modal choices, making just changes along those lines. And then even within an organization, for us to be able to deliver on those particular outcomes, it means, I would say, even social change within the department and people. And so when we're talking about people and our employees and what we need to do for employees, then I think it gets along those lines. So it's not as cut and dry.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. We have both. Obviously, we have the hard infrastructure in CDCR that is quantifiable and measurable, but we also have the human element as well. And I can tell you that it's certainly my hope when I look to the future of something like CompStat. I want to find a way to roll the human element into it, and that means, for example, measuring public safety impacts of our decisions, measuring success of rehabilitative programs by looking at recidivism rates for offenders, how well are they reintegrating into our communities, how often are they returning to our prisons. All of those things are things that I look forward to linking back to the success and measuring those as outcomes for us.
And finally, on functional aspects of what you do that would apply to anybody that aren't mission-driven, things like procurement, like IT, like personnel issues, do you include those in your measurements as well?
Yes, we do. All of those things.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. it'd be interesting to see the comparison between how you do it versus you versus some of the others, because I think that would be something that should be relatively consistent within state government. I'm sure you're in your own silos and you're doing very good work, but it would be good for us to be able to compare apples to apples just within California state government. I'll close with this before I open it up to the public. We've talked a lot about performance-based budgeting, but I really believe that I sit on 2 budget subcommittees. If I had agencies and departments coming before me, and as part of their request for funds for different things and their budget allocations, et cetera, they were able to tell me what their performance measures were for that year, that would go a long way to either making me more friendly or less friendly, depending on their performance, and assuming I believed what they were telling me. But I think it's vital, even without a performance-based budgeting model, to have these kinds of measurements to see, are you providing the service that you're supposed to be providing the people of California? And so I think we don't have to get all the way there. I think we're heading in that direction, but I think, by next year, by next year, in the case of all 3 of you, we will have good data that has been fleshed out, and you'll be refining and reviewing. But at that point, we'll have this data to be able to make these decisions on the part of the legislature. Unfortunately, there's 150-something agencies and departments that aren't doing it, and so we're going to keep pushing along these lines. This is just step 1, and I do want to acknowledge that without any administration support, you at your own places have pushed ahead with this, and I know that cannot be easy in light of everything else that's going on to keep the ball moving forward in this area, because I was just astounded when I saw the lack of penetration of performance measurement in California state government in 2010. It just blows my mind. Assemblymember Caballero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to underscore what you were saying. I think with the advent of technology, I want to thank you first for your testimony here today, for the information. I think you're going in the right direction. You're able to provide really important information. I have people asking me, as we carry bills here at in the legislature, how do we know that if a bill is successful and gets signed, that it actually is doing, it's achieving the purpose for which the bill was introduced? And because of term limits, people aren't around long enough to be able to actually then ask the department to give us information or to see whether things are working or not. And with the advent of technology, people can get information very quickly. And what they're asking of me is, where can I find information that tells us how this is doing or how that is doing? And so unfortunately, the only time they read about the state in the newspaper is when there's something that didn't go right, something that happened that was unfortunate. It's going to happen. We're not perfect. All of us are imperfect people, and that makes us an imperfect government, but we do a lot of really good things. And so these measurement tools will give us an opportunity, really, I think, to tell the good stories so that we can really focus on what government's doing. It's keeping people safe. It's cleaning up groundwater. It's rehabilitating prisoners. In other words, there's a lot of things that we're doing well, but we don't get a chance to see it. And I think that the chair made a really good point. As we're looking through our budget process, we don't get enough information to be able to say, how can we be helpful in helping to achieve a mission that you do? And frankly, I think we have untold stories. We have lots of state employees that do really, really good work, but this story's not getting out there. And so this gives us an opportunity to focus on that, to say, how about if we change the metrics? Maybe our legislation gets better, because we're not making assumptions based on no information. And I think from my perspective that people really do come up here to do a good job, but we're in the dark many times in regards to the detail. And then we also need to look at opportunities for operational improvement. What tasks are you doing that maybe doesn't belong in your department, that should go somewhere else, or go over to another agency altogether? And the performance measures will give us an opportunity to take a look at that, because we may have a number of departments, or more than one, doing the same thing, and we could put it over into one department and not have overlapping responsibilities. And so I really appreciate this information. I'm a big advocate of the performance-based budgeting, because it gives us an opportunity, I think, to have a little bit more information and be clear about where we're going with the work that you all are doing. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Anybody in the audience wishing to speak? Come to this mic over here.
I'm Stephanie Bray with SEIU Local 1000. We represent 95,000 state employees. We are actually in support of performance-based budgeting and measurements. We feel it is a way to make sure that there's a way to look at what state employees are doing and to show the good work that they're doing. The key to it is you have to include the employees in the process all the way along. It can't just be a survey. You have to talk to them about the whole process. They have a lot of ideas on how to improve things, and you just need to make sure that they're included in that whole process. When you talk about budgeting, it is not necessarily a cost-saving measure. It takes a long time to save money. When you start a performance-based budgeting idea, it does take a few years to actually save money, but in the long run, you can actually get some better measures for the public. And that's the key here, is to make sure that the public money is being used in a better way. And state employees really do want the public money, because they are taxpayers too, and they want to make sure that's being used well. So we just are supportive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Okay, seeing no one else. Thank you all very much, panelists. I can't acknowledge enough how impressive it is that it's happening even with no leadership at the top. I mean, at the very top, not within your own departments. Clearly, it's happening within your own departments. And I also want to acknowledge how unique this hearing was for this committee. We don't usually. I don't know what the right phrase is. Well, I was going to say we don't usually make nice, but thank you very much for coming. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Our pleasure.
Gelator, may I say one other thing? There's 20 departments doing this, and 130 that's not.
150.
150. You know, when you start your budget hearings, keep that in mind.
Oh,
no.
Believe. Yeah, you got to reward.
Thank you very much.
Risk taking. Thank you. For the committee members. On this sheet, the steps for implementing performance measurements, do you have any additional things, just the things that I added on as I was listening to the discussion? You guys can go.
Yeah. One of the things that I noticed in this draft of steps for implementing performance measures programs, which I assume is the document you're talking about, is that we don't have in here, we have develop the measures, refine and prioritize those measures, but not the adjusting the resources to realign the activities of the department with the performance needs of the organization. And I just thought that was a missing piece.
I wrote it down. I wrote resource allocation somewhere between 3 and 5, or 3 and 4, to have a resource reallocation according to whatever it is that we discovered.
Some practical things, Mr. Chair. We talked about, I don't know how to do this, but give incentive for doing a good job. So I don't know if you start giving commissions or merit pay for management who actually accomplish their goals and make things more efficient. I think it'd be, in the long run, a lot better for our citizens. Okay. But also kind of reflect that in their budgets, not penalize them when they actually do become more efficient. We talked about possibly doing some spot checks of what we do. We had the last hearing, we talked about furniture and the prices for a cubicle. That's pretty easy. Go out to IKEA or wherever and get a cross comparison, but have some spot checks of both purchases, of services. We talked about maybe possibly, when you do a RFP out for a particular job and you you cost it out and you internalize it, and so you can have on the budget committee, you have some comparisons. Are they being efficient? Are they not? We don't have those numbers, and I would hope somewhere in this process that we get feedback from the departments of what we need to do as a legislature to address some of the either handcuffs we're giving them or freedoms they need to do their job both more effectively and efficiently. So we need more of that, I think, versus us asking you. You should be coming to us like an annual report. Hey, these 1,000 reports we're doing don't make any sense. No one's looking at them anyway, or whatever the case may be. Or this purchasing agreement we have through the state's not the best that we could do. We could do better. So those are the type of things I'd like to see.
So barriers and needs to be able to better get to perform these functions. Yes, Assemblymember.
I want to add as a footnote to what Assemblymember Hagman said is that there are a lot of mandates that come down, and so we somewhere need to put in a flag for mandates. They can be mandates that are legislatively passed or through initiative, and that actually cost us without any performance benefits, so that we can go back and part of the challenge is that the public has been as responsible about putting mandates on state agencies, and if they're not working, we need to know so that we can go back to the public and say, look, you required us to do X. This is what it costs, and we haven't seen any benefit for it. Because otherwise what happens is these initiatives have a lifelong, they're there for life, and we haven't modified that. That's a constitutional amendment, but we should have information that tells us, this is not where we want to go. Just in terms of part of the analysis, because we'll never get there because there's nobody looking at that.
Like a certain after-school initiative.
Well, I was thinking about some of the other initiatives that have actually required us to do things.
That one seems to keep surviving, regardless. A couple of the items that I noted were other states' measurements and reporting in the same area, in the same category, to be able to compare to what other states are already doing in these areas. I think that can inform what we do. Private sector and excellence standards, the Baldrige Awards were mentioned. In the federal government, there's the Council for Excellence in Government that gives out the awards every year. We need to be part of that. I don't know when or if California's ever won one of their awards for excellence in government. But again, it's because we don't measure. We can't tell a story without having the data in front of us. The third is synchronized functional and logistical measures. This kind of gets to Assemblymember Hagman's point about personnel, procurement, these kinds of things that everybody has to do, having all of the state agencies and departments having similar measures on that. So those are some of the things that I've added. We will repackage this. We'll get it out to the committee members, and then we'll figure out what the next step is as we're moving forward. But thank you again very much for being here this morning.
Thank you.
We are adjourned.